Picture this, April 19th, 1993. Live on televisions all across the world, a huge compound out on the Texas plains is just engulfed in flames. This was the tragic end to a 51-day standoff between a small religious group and the entire U.S. government. So let's get right into this really complex and heartbreaking story.
And the human cost of that fire, it was just staggering. 76 people died. That included David Koresh, the group's leader, but it also included more than 20 children. It was a loss of life that honestly left a huge scar on the American psyche.
So you have to ask, right? How on earth did we get here? How did federal agents trying to serve a simple search warrant lead to one of the most catastrophic law enforcement events in modern American history? That is the big question we're going to try and unpack here.
To really understand that fire, we've got to rewind. We have to go back to the very beginning of the standoff and get to know the two sides at the heart of this confrontation.
So on one side, you have the federal government. We're talking the ATF, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and later the FBI. They were looking into the Branch Davidians for a couple of really serious things: stockpiling illegal weapons and some very disturbing allegations of child abuse. And on the other side, you had the Davidians, a religious community living together out at their compound called Mount Carmel, all following their leader, a man named David Koresh.
Now, to get what happened, you really have to understand who the Branch Davidians were and what they believed. Because this was about way more than just guns. For them, this was about faith, prophecy, and the end of the world.
So the group actually started as a splinter group, an offshoot of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and their whole belief system was built around apocalyptic prophecies, especially from the book of Revelation in the Bible. They genuinely believed the end times were here and that they were preparing for this final cosmic battle.
And at the very center of all of this was their leader, David Koresh. He was born Vernon Howell, but he changed his name because he saw himself as a Messiah-like figure, the Lamb of God who was destined to unlock the 7 seals of Revelation. Now, his teachings led to some really controversial practices, like polygamy, and he took on multiple spiritual wives. And yeah, some of them were underage. He also started stockpiling a massive arsenal of weapons, which he claimed was for a gun business and, for self-defense.
So you can see how this was all adding up. It was this exact combination of reports, illegal automatic weapons, and those awful allegations of child abuse that put Koresh and Mount Carmel squarely on the ATF's radar back in 1992. And that's what led to them getting the warrants in the first place.
Okay, so let's get to the siege itself. It didn't start quietly with negotiations, it started with a raid that went terribly, terribly wrong. The ATF's whole plan hinged on the element of surprise. They called it a dynamic entry. But the surprise was completely blown. A local news reporter had been tipped off about the raid, and on his way there, he got lost and asked for directions. The person he asked? A mail carrier who just so happened to be David Koresh's brother-in-law. You can't make this stuff up. The Davidians knew the ATF was coming.
Now, if you ask the ATF what happened next, their official account is very clear. As their agents approached the compound, they were ambushed. They say they took heavy fire from inside.
But, and this is a huge but, the Davidian survivors tell a completely different story. They swear that federal agents fired first and that they only shot back to defend themselves. This whole question of who fired the first shot is still one of the most intense points of controversy about the entire event.
Regardless of who started it, the result of that first gunfight was an absolute tragedy. 4 ATF agents were killed and 16 others were wounded. Inside the compound, 6 of the Branch Davidians were killed. The raid was a total disaster, and that's when the FBI was called in to take command of the whole situation.
And what came next was this grueling 51-day standoff. For a little while in the beginning, negotiations seemed to work. They got 19 children released. But those talks fell apart pretty quick. So the FBI decided to ramp up the pressure. They cut the electricity and started blasting these bizarre, loud noises into the compound 24/7. Things like Tibetan chants and the sounds of rabbits being slaughtered. By the 51st day, a totally frustrated Attorney General Janet Reno finally approved a plan to end it with tear gas.
And that brings us right back to where we started. That final, tragic day, and the fire that nobody who saw it will ever forget.
So the final assault started at dawn. The FBI used these armored combat vehicles, they look like tanks, to punch huge holes in the walls of the compound and start pumping in CS tear gas. The official goal, they said, wasn't to attack, but to make it so unbearable inside that everyone would be forced to come out.
So how did the fire start?
This is without a doubt the most controversial part of the whole Waco saga, and there are two completely different stories. The government's official conclusion is that the Davidians started the fire themselves in a mass suicide. They point to audio surveillance from inside that caught members talking about spreading fuel and infrared footage that seems to show 3 fires igniting at the exact same time. But critics argue that the FBI's assault either accidentally started the fire or that some of the pyrotechnic tear gas rounds they used, which can be flammable, sparks the blaze in all that chaos.
But the fire wasn't the end of the story. In a lot of ways, it was a beginning. The events at Waco would send shockwaves across America that were profound and ultimately very violent. For a lot of people, Waco became this ultimate symbol of government overreach. They saw it as proof that the federal government was a tyrannical power, willing to use military tactics on its own citizens. It became fuel for a growing anti-government militia movement all across the country. And that anti-government anger had deadly consequences. The outrage over Waco became a rallying cry that directly motivated a man named Timothy McVeigh. He specifically chose April 19th, the second anniversary of the Waco fire, to get what he called revenge. He detonated a truck bomb outside the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City, killing 168 people.
So here we are, over 30 years later, and Waco is still this haunting, complicated event. It forces us to ask some really hard questions, about the line between religious freedom and law enforcement, about the tactics governments use, and about the explosive consequences when communication just completely fails and mistrust turns deadly. So what are the lessons we're still learning from those 51 days of fire and faith?